AEW Revolution is complete, and we are now heading straight for WrestleMania. What is going on, everybody? Travis Fowler Harkrider back with another edition of Tights and Turnbuckles. If you're new to this channel, welcome. I hope you like what you hear, and if you do, hit that subscribe button because it is completely and totally free. And then make sure you go follow us on our social media pages, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you're coming back to join us for this new episode, welcome back. I always like seeing y'all, and let's get right into it and talk pro wrestling because we've got quite a few things to cover before we get to the creme de la creme and talk about WrestleMania coming up and what's going to happen when we see John Cena for the first time since his now iconic heel turn at Elimination Chamber. What is he going to say tonight on Monday Night Raw? We all look forward to it. But before we go there, let's talk about AEW Revolution. Because as a whole, I don't think the show was absolutely downright terrible. I, like many others, think the main event is where it fell completely flat. And I actually have to agree with JD from NY's assessment of how the match card was placed. And I think that's kind of part of Tony's issue with not just booking, but with how he books his shows, because that's also a big component as to what makes your show successful. But we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Main event, like I said, not a big fan of it. I knew that the cash-in of that contract was coming when Christian won the thing and we put Cope in against Mox for the title. I just knew that that was going to have something to do with Cage. Sure enough, signs the contract and it fails. Mox defeats Christian when he turned it into a three-way to retain the AEW World title. And I really think if you were going to switch the title, at least, even if it's in a transitional sense, that probably would have been the time to do so, and then put Swerve over at the next Dynasty pay-per-view. But maybe they're going to go a different route, and maybe Mox is actually going to be the one to do the honors and crown Swerve once again at Dynasty, of all places, the new AEW World Champion. I don't know. We'll see. We're kind of putting carts before the horse, and we've got some time before we get there. Actually, now that I think about it, I think Dynasty even takes place prior to WrestleMania. So AEW is going to have two pay-per-views take place before we even get to WrestleMania. So props to them. And also, on another big front, I saw something today, and I shared it on my personal X page. If you don't know, follow me over there. I'm at Travis_T and ANDT, where people have dogged on the fact that they've gone to these smaller venues. But if you follow us over on TikTok, that was one of the things that I wanted to see AEW do differently this year, and I'm so glad that they have done so. Yes, they had to move to the smaller venues because obviously they weren't selling out the bigger ones. Okay, cool. The thing is they finally realized the mistake, because if you switch to those mid or smaller venues, they can sound just as impactful as like a 10,000 or 15,000 seat arena. Trust me, if you've never even been to a high-class independent promotion for professional wrestling, you have no idea how small a crowd can make a show feel, how big they can still feel. It's actually pretty amazing when you see it. But anyways, we're kind of going into the weeds there. The matches I did like. I loved Will Ospreay versus Kyle Fletcher for the acrobaticness because, as I've said before, wrestling is genre. It all comes down to what your flavor of wrestling is, and what you like, what you don't like is completely subjective and your choice. Fletcher Ospreay, for what it is, it was entertaining. My favorite match of the night was the one I was looking forward to the most, that being Toni Storm versus Mariah May in what was basically a hardcore match, and they called it the Hollywood ending. It was a great match showing for both ladies. I think it was a perfect cap off to the feud, and overall, I think, and I'm only guessing, but I think this is going to do wonders for Mariah May going forward with her character. And we kind of already know what Timeless Toni Storm's going to be up to, so I look forward to seeing what they do with her and her next challenger, which we'll speak on here in just a moment. The opening match, MJF versus Hangman, was a great way to start the show. I do agree, having the two AEW, I guess, stalwarts, if you will, open up the show was a great thing to do. But nobody ended up talking about that match because of all the extreme violent matches that we had on the show. And that again goes into the booking style, which we talked about, we'll get into a little bit later. So I won't go any further into that. And honestly, outside of that, I wasn't really keen on much else that went on with Revolution. I did like Kenny Omega becoming the international champion. I look forward to seeing what they do with him in that role. Only time will tell what comes of his reign, but I honestly believe the international title is the mid-card title to have for a number of reasons, and I like Kenny holding the title. Hopefully we get a good title reign out of it. If what happens at All In is any indication as to how this title reign is going to go, I think we're in for a treat here. But let's get into what I like to call now the weekly high spots, starting with the steel cage match with CM Punk and Seth Rollins. Now, people have compared the Ospreay Fletcher to this Punk Rollins match. Can't do that. It's two different styles, and both worked out for what they were supposed to be. Punk and Rollins did great. Reigns coming in and helping Rollins win, of course not because he wanted to, but strictly because he's trying to get back at Seth, was a great little nod there. And then the subsequent spear to Punk. Again, I'm not a fan of this going into a triple threat without some kind of stakes involved, but we still have time. We've got over a month until WrestleMania, so time will tell if they're any good at what happens next. Then we saw a luchador very similarly just to Chad Gable in both height and in wear. He showed up to interfere in Rey Mysterio's match with a mask on, which, by the way, I love the little nod where he did the gracias as opposed to a thank you. It was pretty funny, actually. I thought that was great. I actually look forward to seeing what AJ Styles and Logan Paul do on this road to Mania, because I feel like that's the match we're going to get for Styles, is Paul and Styles. Could be a very fun matchup. We've seen what he's done with Seth Rollins in the past. I don't think we're going to see much different from these two. It'll probably be an all-out banger. Then you have the Judgment Day showing very noticeable cracks in the armor. And even though Dominic Mysterio's gone to bat for Finn Balor to get him this Intercontinental title shot tonight, or actually this afternoon if you're watching stateside, I don't think it's going to be something that's going to benefit Balor. It won't surprise me if Judgment Day even screws Balor, and if we see this split off from Finn Balor and the Judgment Day here sooner rather than later. NXT this past week had their special Roadblock episode live from the theater in Madison Square Garden, and there was a lot of TNA crossover. The Hardys and Fraxium had a great TNA tag title match that saw the Hardys retain. Jordynne Grace may have sent Roxanne Perez on her farewell from NXT match, as she defeated Roxanne Perez in a great matchup between those two. We also saw the Clash of the Titans, Obafemi and Moose. Both men showed that they are excellent at what they are for both of their brands. Moose pulled out a phenomenal performance. Obafemi just the same. And Femi picking up the win, retaining the NXT Championship. Javon Evans and Ethan Page had a banger of a street fight themselves that saw Javon hit that springboard cutter to Ethan Page with the chair over his head. Excellent spot there. And picks up the win in this rivalry. Then it was all about the main event. Champion versus champion, title for title. Stephanie Vaquer taking on Julia in an excellent matchup that saw Stephanie Vaquer pick up the win and both the NXT Women's North American and World Championships. Now she is the reigning queen of NXT, and I look forward to seeing what her title reign does from here forward. Over on SmackDown, I gotta say, McIntyre and Priest really wasn't getting me in any kind of interest whatsoever. And now that this has become just like a blood feud of them going after each other whenever they possibly can get to one another, I think has really elevated this whole feud. I look forward to seeing what McIntyre and Priest do. I think McIntyre's little speech to Priest this past week on SmackDown was excellent. Same with Jacob Fatu and Braun Strowman. I love that they're still keeping this rivalry strong, and I think this is going to lead to what I believe will be a last man standing match, or at least that's what it should be heading into WrestleMania. If it is indeed going to be Strowman and Fatu, that's the match to have. Maybe, though, they still do Solo versus Jacob Fatu, because that is the rumored match for both men. But I think I would much rather see that take place after Mania, and maybe have Solo cost Fatu in some form or fashion if they want to go that route. I'm just spitballing here, but I think personally that's what I would like to see for Mania, as opposed to Solo and Fatu. I'd rather see Fatu versus Strowman. Also on SmackDown, Tiffany Stratton, Charlotte Flair are continuing to get at each other's throats, and I know it still feels in some people's minds like this feud isn't really that good, but it really is just about the queen who is trying to see if she can halt the princess's her momentum to the crown, or the throne in this case. Because honestly, Tiffany Stratton has a very similar background to that of Charlotte Flair, because Charlotte was also a gymnast. Tiffany is a gymnast, a successful gymnast at that. So I really do look forward to seeing how this match plays out at WrestleMania. Again, this may not be everybody else's feelings on it, but I do look forward to the match with Flair and Stratton for the women's title. It's one of those fantasy booking matches that I had on my radar when they finally got Tiffany up to the main roster. I felt that way after her feud with Becky Lynch and the awesome Extreme Rules match at No Mercy. So I know that Stratton will be able to hang, and I can't wait to see what happens in that matchup. Then you had the hometown boy Axiom taking on Gunter in a great showing, but still, Gunter is the ring general for a reason, and the hometown boy just picking up an L ever so slightly, though, but then he got choked out at the very end by Gunter. So while it was a great showing, ring general is still standing tall and proud as world champion. Then the Street Profits getting their revenge over DIY in the tag title match, becoming the new WWE Tag Team Champions. Good matchup for both teams, and it's an awesome finish. And honestly, Profits going into Mania as champions is great. I can't wait to see how this tag title situation plays out for WrestleMania this year, because I guarantee there is going to be a match on the main card involving those championships. How it's going to play out is anybody's guess. But right now, we've got the Street Profits as your new champions, and Pretty Deadly is the number one contenders. So we'll see how this plays out over the next few weeks going into Mania. But I am still pretty certain we're going to see a multi-team match for those championships. Then let's move on over. Well, before we hit AEW, I want to still talk about the international crowds, because Spain just showed exactly what France did last year. And honestly, anytime they go international, the crowds are just white hot. So before we get into the next phase, I want to just say awesome job to Spain, and I look forward to all these European shows that we have over these next few weeks for both Raw and SmackDown, because I think they're going to be some of the most entertaining episodes we get all year round. But now we can move forward over to AEW. The Billy Starks Mercedes Moné thing is quite intriguing to me, but mainly just because I hope we get Athena versus Moné, because I know both women can work, and especially with Athena being on this unbelievable Ring of Honor women's title reign, which admittedly I haven't been invested or even watched really. But the fact that she has this accolade as now being the longest ROH champion ever, I think that's a great piece of storytelling that you can do between these two, because now if they're really going to go with Mercedes being the belt collector stealing Kenny Omega's gimmick, why not put the ROH title on her too, or at least give her the opportunity to get that belt? I'm still waiting for either Deonna Purrazzo or Mariah May to go after that TBS title, but I could deal with Athena and Moné for the ROH title, if not both the ROH and TBS titles. I think that could be a fun title for title matchup between those two ladies here, hopefully sooner rather than later, maybe even at Dynasty. That would be a match I'd like to see. MJF having his promo with MVP, potentially offering a card to be a part of the Hurt Syndicate. Didn't see that coming, but I did see a meme this past week that compared it to Owen Hart becoming a member of the Nation of Domination in '98, which, yeah, those vibes are really there. I don't see it happening. I don't think I want to see that. I like MJF being on his own and the Hurt Syndicate doing their thing. So um, I think keep them far away from each other and let's work on the Hurt Syndicate and Outrunners feud because I like the Outrunners. I think they're a great gimmick and I want to see more of them on the Dynamite show as opposed to Collision, mainly because admittedly I don't watch Collision regularly. So put them on the main show because I enjoy seeing them. I think they're a fun gimmick. I know they were on Dynamite this past week for a period of time and I really like their entrance with the whole switching to old school 80s vibe screen. I think it's great. They're just so much fun and I really want to see more of them in AEW. Then Ospreay sets his sights on All In. He wants to main event that show, and he wants to do it with the AEW title on the line. I said in that same TikTok where I was talking about what could benefit AEW overall, I did say that I felt like Will Ospreay had become the face of that promotion, and honestly, I think you should crown him champion at some point or time. Swerve, though, I also said was right there with him because last year, everyone was all about Swerve Strickland. And through this past year, Ospreay has been the one to kind of take that AEW banner. But Swerve is still within those sights. So I could totally see something play out between Swerve and Ospreay, maybe even being the main event at All In Texas. That would actually be a fun card, especially if the Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada match takes place that's rumored at All In. You get these two matches, especially with the stakes that could be honestly on both matches. You could have a pretty fun, solid co-main event card. So I would love to see it. We still got plenty of time before July gets here, so only time will tell if we see one, if not both, or maybe neither of those matches take place in Arlington. Moving forward, we saw Megan Bayne attack Toni Storm after a great promo talking about how she's still the champion. It looks like Megan Bayne now has her sights set on timeless Toni Storm. Storm's got a big challenge ahead of her with the Megacyst coming after her. So that'll be a fun feud. And then over on Collision, we saw Jon Moxley attack Swerve Strickland. I saw the highlights of that earlier today. And it'll be interesting to see what route they take with the Mox Cope match coming up this week. The street fight is set for the world title, so is that going to be a curveball, or are they going to still go with Moxley and Swerve? I think they should do Mox and Swerve, but this is AEW, so I guess anything can happen at any time is kind of their mentality. But both on Dynamite and Collision, we saw the International Title Tournament Eliminator take place, and now we know what the 4 participants will be going into Dynamite this week in a Fatal 4-Way to determine who will face Kenny Omega at not Wrestle Dynasty, what am I thinking? We already saw that. At Dynasty in AEW, the 4 men, Mark Davis, Ricochet, the debuting this past week and very successful Speedball Mike Bailey, and honestly, the greatest international champion, in my opinion, to this date, Orange Cassidy. I actually kind of like this 4 match. I like these 4 men in the match. And of the 4, I think out of all of them, I would almost rather see Ricochet take this. I think he's done enough with this character work, and especially with his feud with Swerve recently. I think he deserves to have the shot against Kenny Omega at Dynasty. I think it could be a very fun matchup for the international title. Even though there might not be a title to change hands, I can see a very, very awesome and fast-paced matchup between Omega and Ricochet. Then also on Collision, we could talk about this being a little bit of a poke towards the rumors this week and the subsequent vignettes that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But it looks like Hologram and Commander have now formed the team known as the Lucha Stars. As ridiculous as that is, it is also very much a poke at the Lucha Brothers, who are rumoredly going to reunite on the WWE landscape. And I think that rumor, we can honestly say, is getting more solidified by the date. Then over on TNA, Elijah made his in-ring singles debut, and I love that TNA picked him up as a signee. I think he's going to do great things over there. Tessa picks up a win on Impact this week and also picked up a win at the Sacrifice event with a special entrance that most people thought was potentially in poor taste. I don't know if I would necessarily say it's in poor taste, but it definitely was one of those like, are we trying a little too hard here? I don't know. Again, people know my feelings on Tessa. I'm still rolling with it, but we know that there's plenty of people that do not. So, but nevertheless, picks up a win. They've got focal points on her, so we can only continue to let this play out as it is. Then we also saw Moose retain the X Division title in a ladder match over Jeff Hardy at Sacrifice. And the big thing that came out of that show was Nick Nemeth turning heel and siding with his very delusional Ryan Nemeth brother. And it looks like we're going to see a Hardys versus Nemeth tag team title feud. Could be actually very fun. Also, I got to say, Mike Santana, and Mustafa Ali have been putting in great work, and I know their match at Sacrifice killed as well. I didn't really care who won between the two. I just knew that these two are the stalwarts for TNA right now because Ali's doing excellent character work, as well as Santana being the new franchise player, if you will, taking the spot of what Josh Alexander was, and now he's filling that void. Excellent stuff from both men. Then let's get back to those vignettes I was talking about briefly. 2 vignettes were aired on Smackdown this week. One with an ominous 4 number. Nobody knows exactly what that means, but the ominous fill with the smoke and the black background really is giving people vibes that we are about to witness the return of Aleister Black. And if rumors are to be believed, he is indeed coming back and being on the Smackdown brand, which makes sense. That's where his wife Zelina Vega is currently at, as she is making her own way towards a U.S. title match. I look forward to seeing Black come back. Is this the first sign? I really hope so. But also, we saw another interesting vignette that had some orange light with what looked to be some kind of potential luchador sitting on a top rope, lightning flashing around with an orange-red vibe light behind him. Honestly, it looks like a phoenix rising from the ashes, if you will. And I really do hope that that is indeed for Rey Fenix. And I also hope they just simply call him Phoenix in WWE, because if you're going to reunite them, I like the one-word names for the both Lucha Brothers, Penta and Phoenix, the Lucha Brothers. Sounds like money to me. Then, the rumor for AEW is a potential merger of 2 mid-card titles, one of which is not the TNT title, and I really think that should be the one to go. No, instead, there is talks of merging the international and continental titles together. Yeah, the continental title they just introduced 2 years ago and actually have a great little tournament idea to go with it. Yeah, they're looking to potentially get rid of that title and merge it with the international title. I guess if you do go that route, you could call that person the Intercontinental Champion, huh? But don't. Okay, I'm being stupid. Anyway, but seriously, you're merging these 2 titles, and honestly, I don't understand why. I do really believe that the TNT title should be the one to go if you're getting rid of a mid-card title, because you do have 3 of them, and you need to get rid of at least one of them, because none of them, with the exception, in my opinion, of the international title, has that prestige value right now. Again, I think the lineage is what makes up the prestige for the international title. The continental title, there's only been 2 people to hold that title, Eddie Kingston being the first, and then the current reigning champion, Kazuchika Okada. So I really don't think you can say a lineage is there for that, so I guess you could get rid of that. There is a lineage with the TNT title, although I feel like it's gone down in value over the last 2 years. But nevertheless, this is the rumored idea, and I guess you could look at pulling that off. Also, at All In, this goes into what I was saying earlier, having your 2 marquee matches. You could have Ospreay versus Swerve for the AEW Championship and the face of the company if you want to go into the real deep weeds on that. And then co-main event, Kazuchika Okada and Kenny Omega, 2 men that put on some of the best matches in New Japan's past 10 years, going at it again in AEW. Yeah, it's money, and if they're both the respective champions they are now, yeah, merger makes sense in that match. would be a fun co and main event headliners. So maybe that's what we're going to get. Time will only tell. But then, two more pieces of business. One real quick nod. The Bloodline Saga has fully been uploaded. It's a 4-hour video over on YouTube with the WWE channel. WWE's YouTube channels have been hitting it out of the park. I am going to eventually have this Bloodline Saga playing and have it watching the whole thing. I think it's just been amazing. And as most people have said, myself included, it's the best wrestling storyline of all time. So I'll eventually end up watching it. But again, that's 4 hours. So you got to dedicate some time to that, even if it's background noise. But we talked about the booking style of Tony Khan, and honestly, I'm not a fan of his hot shot booking, because even though it is intriguing when you get matches, for instance, that was on Collision of Ricochet and Shibata. Yeah, I kind of want to watch that, but this time, this is one of those exceptions where it did have somewhat of a meaning to it as the winner going on in this makeshift tournament to crown a new number one contender to Kenny Omega's title. Outside of that, there was no other reason to have it. And really, that's what a tournament is used for mostly, is to create those matches that you want to see. And you can create other matches out of that tournament style as well that go right into those, quote, dream match scenarios. But that's always been Tony's issue, is he's booking matches for the sake of just booking them. And that's not always the thing to do. Sometimes you can get away with it, but when it's the only thing to do, we've seen New Japan do this, and yes, they do it successfully for the most part, but they also still incorporate stories. And on top of that, their version of wrestling is that more athletic, sport-like based product that has been successful for Japan. The success of that type of wrestling is only equivalent to AEW and certain indie promotions like PWG and GCW now, once Ring of Honor when they were their own entity. You could still make that argument, but it's under the AEW banner, so I think they're one and the same. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't work in the Western side. It is about more story as opposed to moves, whereas Japan, I would say, is more move-based over stories. It's not saying that it's right or wrong. It's just simple facts that you can see by the way they're presented. And then with Tony not knowing how to structure, especially a pay-per-view card, to where you can have your breather matches as opposed to having, as JD from NY said on his show right after Revolution, to have a hardcore match followed then by a steel cage match shortly after, and then another title match or whatever the structure was, you kind of overshadow some of the bigger matches, like MJF and Hangman Page. Nobody talked about how good that match was, but it was a great match. It just wasn't what anybody was thinking about at the end of that Revolution pay-per-view, and it should have been something that people talked about. All the other matches, Swerve and Ricochet, should have been something that people talked about because they delivered, but they weren't. It was all about Kyle Fletcher and Will Ospreay, and in my opinion, Timeless Tony Storm and Mariah May, which should have main evented, did not, and then it had a flat main event with Mox and Cope. So you had a decent show, but it just got worn out, and even Swerve couldn't save it with the tack at the end. So that's why I say Revolution was okay, but the structure of the show really played a factor into why it wasn't more impactful. So hopefully somebody can get in Tony's ear eventually and really rectify some of these little errors, because I love that we've switched to smaller venues. I like that it leads to the bigger venue pay-per-views. And now if we can just start curbing this little booking issue with Tony, or issues in some cases, I think we'll be right as rain and the course will be set straight again with AEW. Also, before we let you go, I just wanted to make one note here because it's been talked about a lot. Stone Cold Steve Austin has announced an autograph session at the WWE World on both WrestleMania's Night 1 and 2, that Saturday and Sunday. Is it going to be simply an autograph session, or could there be some validity to the rumors that maybe with Cena having Rock in his corner, maybe Austin won't be too far behind to support Cody? It'll be interesting to see. We've got a long way to go for Mania, but this is where we stop our road for Tights and Turnbuckles tonight. What do you guys want to see at WrestleMania? Would it be cool to have Austin be in Cody's corner? I think so. Let me know what you think down at the bottom. How did you feel about the Revolution pay-per-view, and what was your favorite match? Sound off in those comments. And do you think the Lucha Brothers are going to be successful if they do indeed unite in WWE. All that and anything else you want to share, talk about it in that comment section. Like I said, if you're new to this channel, thank you so much for checking us out. Make sure you've hit that subscribe button, and to everybody else, if you haven't, make sure you're doing the same thing and following us on all of our social media pages. I'll come back at you again next week with some more wrestling talk here on Tights and Turnbuckles. But until then, y'all take care, have a great week, and just continue to love pro wrestling.